Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am here today with Marc El Khoury, who is the founder and CEO of AI Fleet. And today we are going to talk about the debate on the trucker shortage, because there's a lot of talk of that in the industry today on whether or not it's true. But we're going to get into a little bit of that today. Hi, Marc. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much, Brielle. Great to be here.
Yeah. So, can you just give us a little bit of background about AI Fleet?
Absolutely. So AI Fleet is a motor carrier. We're basically a trucking company today with about 200 trucks and 200 drivers. The idea behind AI Fleet is that we are utilizing our own technology to optimize our assets and our drivers so that we can get more utilization, essentially more loaded miles from them. You may notice the average driver in the US drives around 50 to 40 to 50% of the time where they're actually allowed to drive. And the rest of that time is unfortunately wasted. And for many drivers, they get paid by the mile. So the waste costs them a lot of money. The idea of AI Fleet is to use technology to schedule loads and routes for the drivers in such a way as to maximize their miles. And of course, as a carrier as well, it means that we are utilizing our trucks and our employees, because all our drivers are employees, more efficiently. In parallel, we are also looking to automate as much as possible of our operations workflow. So really the purpose of the company is to optimize our assets, optimize our drivers, create a good livelihood for our drivers, and automate as much as possible for our operations so we can serve our customers in the most efficient way possible.
Well, so serving your customers in the best way possible. Obviously, that comes with drivers. We need a lot of drivers in the industry, and there's a lot of talk, both sides and back, about whether or not there is a driver shortage. Based on the data that you've seen and things you've seen in the industry, where do you believe the industry does stand on a driver shortage?
That's such a great question because we often talk about it with is there or is there not a driver shortage? And of course, there's a little bit of a supply and demand component of that, right? Today, the state of the industry is certainly not as, we are certainly not as, let's say, short on drivers, if we were to say that, as we were 2 years ago. And you can see that in the rates. Trucking is a fairly commoditized industry. As the rates have plummeted, you can imagine that there's probably more supply than there is demand. So that's one very, fairly vague part of the equation. The second component, though, is, well, how do you solve, even if we all agree that there is a shortage, how would you solve for it? And it goes back to the utilization of the driver. Meaning when we're talking about a driver shortage, we're often not talking about, well, what is the current utilization of the driver? Because I remember there's this study by the ATA that said that there's a 80 or 60,000 shortage of drivers. So you can imagine that if you have 1 million drivers in long haul trucking, that means that improving utilization by 6%, meaning getting those drivers to drive 6% additional miles, would solve the shortage of the drivers. Now that we know that the average driver drives around 40 to 50% of their time, that essentially means driving just a little bit more. I think MIT estimated driving 15 additional minutes a day would mean that there is no driver shortage. And so, well, what if everybody drove 2 additional hours a day, or 60% of their time instead of 50% of their time? Now, theoretically, everybody agrees there's no driver shortage because the drivers are being utilized better. That's really where we stand. We stand with the data that it doesn't matter what we believe right now. What matters is that if we served drivers better by letting them drive more, which is what every truck driver wants to do, you essentially solve the problem, whether that problem exists or not in the first place.
And now, how does all of that fit into the freight recession?
The freight recession is a good example of demand is now below supply in a way. I mean, at least we have enough supply to cover the demand. So it's a little bit of another criteria where, when you see the cost of running operations be below the rate that you're getting in the spot market, but even right now in the contract market, this is where it becomes really hard to say that at least at the current demand level and the current supply level, it's very hard to claim that there's a shortage, because you would imagine that if there's a shortage, you're able to at least get back some of your carrier costs. Whereas right now, You can see that in all the public earnings. The vast majority of trucking companies are in the red. So it becomes really hard to, especially, if we agreed or disagreed in the good days, whether there's a driver shortage or not, it becomes really hard to justify that point during a freight recession where demand is, at least lower than what it was, at least relatively to the supply that is available out there.
Yeah, it's so hard to believe that there really is a shortage when every day we're covering massive layoffs and bankruptcies and what a hard time it is in the industry right now.
I
Um,
completely agree. Yeah.
what advice would you give to like individual fleets or your the actual people who are running the fleets and doing the Tetris game?
What's interesting about trucking is that at the end of the day, we're a trucking company as well. And we're all in many ways competing for, there's really a fixed amount of freight out there. You can imagine there's a component of the GDP that you can think about, the freight represents. And in many ways, every carrier is going after that freight. And so when there's a freight recession, this is where, of course, first of all, what we've always found is that knowing your cost is a very, very big component of running a trucking company. And costs get very hidden because it's not just about your fuel costs and your driver job, but really your overhead cost, which in the industry has been skyrocketing. That is actually a big component as well of the lack of profitability today in the industry. So for us, when we think about solving or trying to solve the scalability that is really lacking in trucking, today in full truckload, the largest company has 1% market share. It goes back to how do you really solve the utilization barrier? How do you get more of your assets and your drivers, which then prevents you from losing the drivers? If I go back to the question of is there a shortage or not, large fleets are hiring tens of thousands of drivers a year. The fact that they are left with 5,000 drivers or 1,000 drivers, et cetera, that's not really a it's not really a driver shortage problem. That's a retention problem. And it goes back to what does a driver want? They want to get paid. How do you get paid? By driving more miles. How do you get more miles? By increasing your utilization. So really the feedback is always where are you wasting your driver's time is likely where all of us as a trucking industry have to, this is the problem that we need to solve. It's the waste along the driver journey as opposed to how many additional drivers we can add to the industry.
Do you have any predictions for what the next year of trucking and freight is going to be, or the next few years?
Not good at predictions. I think we all have hope in the industry that supply and demand has to balance itself a little bit so that at least you start seeing some sort of recovery where trucking companies are able to recoup at least their costs so that they can continue to survive and hopefully thrive. That's one. I think the more general prediction moving forward is we're probably at this inflection point in trucking where technology can finally have an impact. I think there's just been a lot of investment in the industry overall. We've seen a lot of it go to intermediaries, to brokers, not as much going to the carrier side, which for us has always been, a missed opportunity because a lot of the waste, a lot of the challenges are actually on the carrier side. And it's very hard to solve that problem through just software or through a broker. If the problem is not at your company, it's very hard for you to solve that problem. So part of where we see the industry going is we do see the opportunity for a little bit more of growth of the carrier side from a scalability perspective. Full truckload is one of the very few industries out there where there is, almost 500 to a million carriers and where the largest company has 1% market share. You can imagine that technology, specifically the focus on utilization, can help unlock a little bit more of the scalability challenges that the industry has had. Our parallel to that is the less than truckload industry, where basically as you grow, you have more terminals, the large companies are able to consolidate shipments and they're able to cut their cost per shipment, which makes it a little bit hard to compete with the very large carriers in the LTL industry. The parallel does not exist in full truckload right now. Everybody's costs are about the same. Sometimes if you get a little bit less in fuel and equipment like the large carriers do, you usually pay it back in overhead. And so where we believe technology will be truly at an inflection point in trucking is it will help carriers cut their cost per mile by getting this additional utilization. Because as you can imagine, we get paid by the mile. So the more you're able to amortize your fixed costs over additional miles, the more your cost per mile goes down. And today, AI Fleet has probably one of the lowest cost per miles in the industry. And so our view is that that approach can help you continuously grow even in a down market, and hopefully, allow you to break the current ceiling of scalability that we've seen in trucking.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other trends in technology that you are excited about before we end today?
Yeah, I would say truly we are starting to see the impact of AI, specifically of large language models within trucking. A lot of the tasks that are very, not just repetitive, but there are actually that traditionally required understanding, understanding messages with typos, understanding messages that are incomplete. We are now truly able to automate, I would say, the vast majority of our communication by understanding who is asking us what, how does our technology connect, understand the messages, connect to our database, and then be able to provide accurate information no matter what the customer or the driver or really anybody who is emailing us is asking for. We are starting to see a true unlock from uh, another bottleneck that we've seen in trucking is like the driver to office FTE ratio. We are now seeing the opportunity to double, if not triple, what is currently considered normal through more automation with LLMs.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for that overview. It's so interesting to see all these different sides of the trucking driver shortage debate and all these other things that are going on in the industry. It is a crazy time right now. So I love these conversations. But thank you so much. That's all I have time for today. Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Brielle. Great to be here.